Hot. It's 5:05 and welcome into a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We start with breaking news this morning out at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, where service workers are on a picket line and on strike during a very busy travel week. Employees of ABM and Prospect Airport Services cast private ballots on Friday to authorize a work stoppage at the airport in Charlotte, which began at 5 o'clock a few minutes ago this morning. Officials with Service Employed International Union announced the impending strike in a statement about 3 hours ago, saying that workers would be demanding, quote, an end to poverty wages and respect on the job during the holiday travel season. ABM and Prospect Airport Services contract with American Airlines to provide services such as cleaning airport interiors, removing trash, and escorting passengers in wheelchairs that need additional assistance. Workers say they previously raised the alarm about their growing inability to afford basic necessities, including food and housing. They describe living paycheck to paycheck and unable to cover life expenses like car repairs while performing jobs that keep countless planes running on schedule. In the statement, it reads, quote, we're on strike today because this is our last resort. We can't keep living like this. This is ABM cabin cleaner Priscilla Holy saying, quote, we're taking action because our families can't survive. Several hundred workers are apparently stepping off of the job this morning as that work stoppage will continue. Most of them earn between $12.50 and $19 an hour, which is well below the living wage for a single person in the Charlotte area, according to union officials. The Charlotte Douglas Airport officials have said that this holiday travel season is expected to be one of the busiest on record, with an estimated 1 million passengers departing the airport between last Thursday and the Monday after Thanksgiving. In addition to walking off the job, striking workers plan to hold a rally between 11 and 1 p.m. today, calling it Strikesgiving. They're doing that in place of a Thanksgiving meal that they claim that many of their workers can't afford later this week. The union said airport service workers will make holiday travel possible by keeping airplanes safe, clean, and running, despite their critical role in the profit margins that they claim that these major corporations like American Airlines enjoy. Many airport service workers must work 2 to 3 jobs to make ends meet. ABM said it would take steps to minimize disruptions from any demonstrations. Looking at some live shots from outside the airport this morning, that strike is ongoing right now, breaking this morning. We will keep an eye on those details throughout the show and pass them along to you right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:08, News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. We've got an update this morning on the federal level in regards to a judicial nomination that does have multiple North Carolina connections. Katie Zender continues with us this morning from the Carolina Journal News Hour. Katie, last week we talked about an individual by the name of Ryan Parks and played through some comments of Senator Tillis arguing against his nomination. Can you give us a little backstory and then an update on what we learned late last week?
Right. So Ryan Park is the Solicitor General of North Carolina. He is one of several pending judicial nominations at the federal level. And so last week, Senator Thom Tillis had made some comments in opposition to Parks's confirmation. He has been appointed by the Biden administration earlier this year to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Tillis made some comments last week in opposition to Parks and calling it a, quote, non-starter. Tillis has also been critical of how the Biden administration has handled the confirmation process throughout the year. So on Wednesday evening, U.S. Senate Democrats agreed to stop 4 judicial nominations, including Solicitor General Parks. And so this was a bipartisan deal in the Senate. Senator Tillis put out a statement that said, the Senate yesterday reached a deal not to bring Biden's 4 pending circuit nominees for a vote, which will allow President Trump to replace them. This includes the 4th Circuit vacancy, which is where Parks is nominated to. Then Tillis goes on to say, I expect the judges who submitted their retirements will not play partisan politics with a presidential transition and a bipartisan Senate deal by returning to retire. No judges did this during the previous lame duck because the judiciary needs to be above partisan politics. So basically what's happening is the Senate has made a bipartisan deal to block these nominations and allow President Trump to replace these nominations when he is sworn into office late in January next year.
You know, it's interesting that the last comments there from Tillis, and I hadn't even thought about that until I read through your story, that if these judges unretire from those posts, I believe all of them right now are Obama appointees that are in those positions, then those positions, I guess, would no longer be vacant, and then there would be no position to fill. That would be interesting to follow.
Right, exactly. And that's something that we don't see very often, Nick, is we don't see someone who, decides to retire and then is like, oh, I'm gonna come back now, because of I don't want this person to be in that position, or, because these nominations have been blocked. So that would be interesting to see if that were to happen.
Yeah, we see it in sports often where coaches retire and then come back. Not sure that we see it often, but Katie, these are pretty big positions that we're talking about. For all intents and purposes, these are lifetime appointments until the judge either dies or retires, correct?
Correct. That is true, Nick. And then I spoke with Mitch Kokai. He's our senior political analyst here at the John Locke Foundation. He has been following this story for quite some time. And he said, he made some analysis of Tillis. He said, this is the type of legislative action that both supporters and detractors have come to expect from Senator Tillis. So, whether you support or, are, against Senator Tillis, this is the kind of actions that we have come to expect from him. This is kind of par for the course for him. Kokai goes on to say, critics will complain that Tillis was willing to accept a deal to allow some of President Biden's judicial appointments to move forward, and they will argue that Tillis should have rejected any kind of deal with a Democrat at any time for any reason. That's some pretty critical analysis. And, if what Mitch Kokai is saying here is correct, and, Mitch is a very good political analyst, so I'm sure that this is correct. This is some pretty, harsh criticism of Tillis.
Well, and Katie, just kind of stepping away from the story at the topic this morning for a second, Tillis is going to be up for re-election in just 2 short years. He runs in the midterm election. We saw how close his race was last time. He has, unfortunately, in the past come under the gun of the MAGA Republicans and the more conservative individuals that feel that he's not doing enough in Washington, D.C. He is not a figure that is always in the good graces of Republicans and conservatives in North Carolina. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what he does over the next 24 months or so as he heads into what will likely be a contested primary and definitely a contested general election in 2026.
Right, exactly, Nick. Tillis is more of lean a little bit more towards the center. Even though he is a Republican, he's definitely leaning more towards the center than he is towards the conservative side. I believe it was Conservative Review that puts out their, rating of all the different federal legislatures, and I believe Tillis was rated at like 49% or something.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting trend to follow as we see Trump get into office in portions of January. Of course, all of his appointments to his cabinets, those will all run through the Senate, and it's likely that Thom Tillis will play a large part in a lot of that. Katie Zender, appreciate the update. Thanks for joining us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:13, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. So far.
It's 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Monday morning to you. We continue to track additional details this morning about the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. The acronym is NCORE. We spent a lot of time on them last week. They were a group that was set up in 2018 to deal with federal monies coming into the state of North Carolina to deal with hurricane relief from Matthew and Florence. That would be those storms, of course, affecting portions of eastern North Carolina. We are learning this morning that the actual debt that NCORE faces is more than $319 million. Those numbers changed dramatically over a span of just 1 week, according to the North Carolina General Assembly, which now states that that number is 80% higher than was first disclosed to the GA. The Disaster Relief Agency's deficit budget was widely reported at $175 million until last Monday, when officials bumped that number to $221 million. That took place during a very contentious committee meeting with now vacant NCORE Director Laura Hogshead, and she said that that was the worst case scenario, noting that it could potentially jump upwards of $264 million. However, on Friday, the House Oversight and Reform Committee released an analysis stating that NCORE's deficit is now $100 million more than Governor Roy Cooper's staff acknowledged. A financial breakdown puts NCORE at $319 million in the red, emphasizing their muddy financial situation. According to the report from the GA, it says, quote, leadership of the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency gave incomplete responses to pointed questions from members of the Joint Legislative Commission on Government Operations Subcommittee on Hurricane Response and Recovery during the November the 18th hearing. According to the analysis, the claims made to legislatures are refuted by lawmakers with a clear breakdown of the numbers. The report notes that NCORE leaders did not include any contingency for higher construction costs for any of the estimated nearly 1,400 homes that are still to be that still need to be complete due to some of the failures at NCORE. It was a busy week last week for that organization. Monday, there was the hearing that took place with Director Laura Hogshead. She was once again grilled by leaders in the North Carolina General Assembly for her failure in the office. She admitted that the budget overdues and them currently running in the red was her problem, her responsibility, that she was not watching the numbers as clearly as she should have been. You then fast forwarded to the middle part of the week. We learned that Laura Hogshead had left that position. Still, as of this morning, it's not clear whether she resigned from the position, if she was asked to leave by Governor Roy Cooper. That happened late last week. Perry Davis, who works directly for the governor, is now in charge of that organization. And now, according to the General Assembly, they are $319 million in debt, according to some analysis out late last week. All of this while the General Assembly tries to figure out which group, which organization is going to be responsible for the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that are going to come into North Carolina in regards to recovery out in western North Carolina. This is a story that unfortunately is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. You can read more details and actually look at that analysis over on our website this morning. Brianna Kramer's got the details at carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:24 on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. We've got an update on a story we talked about 2 weeks ago with a couple of advocacy groups that were arguing for the release of prisoners that had to be relocated after multiple prison facilities out in western North Carolina had to be closed or temporarily shut down due to the devastation from Hurricane Helene. And we do have an update this morning to get that. Katie Zender of the Carolina Journal joins us this morning on the News Hour. Katie, about 2 weeks ago, those advocacy groups said, hey, DPS, you've got to let these folks go. The prisons are over capacity. And there was some ambiguity when we talked about that, and it seems like now we've got some official numbers coming out.
Right. So the North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections has issued a letter in response to the letter that was originally sent, by these human rights groups advocates, where they've gone through and addressed all of the allegations and claims and accusations made by these groups against the Department of Adult Corrections, concerning these prisoners that were transferred to these other facilities. And so they've finally responded to this letter. And basically what they said is groups related to the treatment and conditions of inmates are based on information that is, quote, incorrect. Further, they said some reports are, quote, totally false from a, quote, small number of disgruntled offenders.
So let's go into first for folks that may not be familiar with the story a couple of weeks ago. What were some of the original accusations that some of these groups were originally making, and then what has Adult Corrections said in response? Because some of them were that some of these facilities were more than 100% over capacity, and that, based on those letters, Katie, it seemed like there could have been some real issues going on.
Right. So basically, there were a few different accusations, but one of the main ones was overcrowding, due to the transfer of these prisoners. And so I spoke with Department of Adult Corrections a few weeks ago and to just double check these numbers that they had put into their original letter, these human rights advocates groups had put in their original letter. And I said, are these numbers correct? And what they told me at the time was, we have no idea where they got these numbers from. Now, to be clear, they didn't say that the numbers were wrong or inaccurate. They just said they didn't know where the numbers came from. And then he also told me that there are 3 tiers of operating capacity, and that estimating overcrowding and operating capacity in these correctional facilities is very complicated because it is based on these 3 tiers. So what they had told me at the time was there's 3 tiers. The first one is standard operating capacity for these facilities. The second one is expanded operating capacity. And then the third one is maximum operating capacity. And so that was one of the big accusations from these human rights advocates groups was overcrowding. And so in their letter, the NCDAC, the Department of Adult Corrections in North Carolina, responded saying that the data the groups used was wrong because, quote, as you are no doubt well aware, the percentages you cite reflect standard operating capacity for these facilities, not expanded operating capacity, and certainly not maximum operating capacity. So basically what they're saying here is the numbers are wrong because they're based off the lowest level of operating capacity that the Department of Adult Corrections uses. And then they go on to say these other evaluative measures exist precisely so that events that trigger exceeded standard operating capacity can be measured in order to ensure continued adequate space for offenders.
So, Katie, if I'm understanding what you're saying, it sounds like they were basing that 100% thing, that 100% number off of that standard operating capacity. So when they said, a facility's at 106 or 108%, well, that was based off of that smaller base load number, not that expanded, or I guess in the third case, the emergency capacity that they would have and do have in the case of a situation like we saw at West, where hundreds of prisoners have to be moved due to those facilities not having electricity, power, whatever it may be.
Exactly, Nick. That's exactly correct.
We'll continue the conversation with Katie Zender coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. 528 News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. It's time to get another look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
It's 5:35. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. We are also streaming live this morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. You can take the show with you on your own time on demand by checking out the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen on your computer by visiting WBT.com and clicking on the podcast tab. We start with breaking news this morning out of Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Some service workers are on strike this morning during a very busy week of travel for the Thanksgiving holiday to protest what they say are unlivable wages. They are employees of a group called ABM and Prospect Airport Services. They cast secret ballots and private ballots on Friday to authorize the work stoppage in North Carolina, which did begin just around 5 o'clock this morning. We only learned about it in a late press release late overnight. Officials with Service Employees International Union announced that impending strike just hours ago, saying that the workers would demand, quote, an end to poverty wages and respect on the job during the holiday travel season. ABM and Prospect Airport Services contract with American Airlines, which has that major hub in Charlotte, to provide services including cleaning airplane interiors, removing trash, and escorting passengers in wheelchairs. Workers say that they previously raised the alarm about their growing inability to afford basic necessities, including food and housing. They describe living paycheck to paycheck and that they are unable to cover expenses like car repairs while performing jobs that keep countless planes running on schedule. Most of those workers earn between about $12.50 and $19 an hour, and it is expected that several hundred workers were expected to walk off the job as early as 5 o'clock this morning and continue that stoppage throughout the day. Charlotte Douglas officials have said that this holiday travel season is expected to be one of the busiest on record, with an estimated 1.02 million passengers departing the airport between last Thursday and the Monday after Thanksgiving. In addition to walking off the job, those striking workers plan to hold a rally at 11 o'clock this morning. They're calling it Strikes-giving. They're doing that in place of the Thanksgiving meal that they say that many of the workers won't be able to afford later this week. Both groups, however, say that they are trying to take steps to minimize that disruption from any of those demonstrations that are ongoing. We continue to track those breaking details this morning right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Late last week, Senate Democrats agreed to block 4 judicial nominations, including Ryan Park, North Carolina's Solicitor General to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. All of that in exchange for Republican cooperation on some other judicial appointments. This bipartisan agreement means that these vacancies, including the ones created by retiring Judge James Wynn, will now be filled by the incoming Trump administration. Senator Thom Tillis announced the deal, emphasizing that it ensures President Trump will appoint these judges, preserving conservative influence on the judiciary. Tillis criticized Park's nomination as a non-starter and highlighted some of the bipartisan opposition to his confirmation. He also urged those retiring judges to respect the bipartisan agreement and to avoid politicizing the judicial position during the presidential transition. Mitch Koch-Ice, our senior political analyst over at the John Locke Foundation, noted that the agreement reflects Tillis's pragmatic approach, which has drawn both praise and criticism. Supporters view the deal as a strategic victory, preventing a progressive nominee like Parks from securing a long-term position on the Fourth Circuit. However, critics argue that Tillis should have resisted any compromise with Democrats. The deal is expected to strengthen conservative judicial priorities under the Trump administration, which begins early next year. It's now 5:39, News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Continuing our conversation this morning with Katie Zender of the Carolina Journal about a few advocacy groups who sent letters to the North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections encouraging the release of inmates and prisoners that had to be relocated due to impacts out in western North Carolina from Hurricane Helene. Katie, have we heard in a follow-up from any of these advocacy groups in response to this letter that Adult Corrections has sent out?
Right. So the Department of Adult Corrections issued their letter of response on November 19th. So just Tuesday, Nick. So to my knowledge, these human rights advocates groups have not responded to the NCDAC's letter so far. One of the other big items in their original letter was a push for the early release of low-risk inmates. And so the NCDAC did respond to this, and when the advocacy rights groups made this push, they were basing it on a similar request that was made during COVID. And so the Department of Adult Corrections responded saying, while it is true that during COVID, the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety exercised extraordinary discretion to release individuals under the Extended Limits of Confinement Program, or ELC, the activation of ELC was a direct response to the global pandemic, with priority given to first releasing those at the highest risk of contracting the disease. So the activist groups also suggested that placing offenders at one of the facilities they were transferred to, Black Mountain Treatment Center, was something that the Department of Adult Corrections said was not beneficial to the community or the offender. So basically, people that are placed at Black Mountain Treatment Center, this is essentially not so much a correctional facility, but more of a treatment program. And so people enrolled in this program are not technically confined. They can leave the program at any time, but to do so is not only a violation of the conditions of their probation, it's hard to see how this is in the best interest of either the community or the offenders by advancing by removing them from the court-ordered substance abuse treatment program.
So I guess it's safe to assume that Adult Corrections disagrees that these folks, these low-risk individuals, should be released, and I guess will be released, which is what the call for these groups, these various groups, made.
Exactly. That's exactly correct, Nick. And then, some of the other allegations that were made by these advocacy rights groups were, allegations in regards to, conditions at certain correctional facilities, saying there were poor conditions, limited food, clean water, flooding in cells, etc. And so the Department of Adult Corrections responded to this and said, you allege concerning conditions at Anson Correctional Institution based on a report of a very small number of disgruntled offenders without seeking confirmation or response from the department. And then they address, specific allegations laid out by human rights advocates. We have this letter linked in the article, and so basically the Department of Adult Corrections goes through each allegation, each accusation, line by line, and either refutes it, or it says, this is partially true, but not entirely true, and here's why. And so I've read through this letter, and basically for each and every allegation, I believe almost every single one of them was either completely false or partially true, but not totally true, and then they go on to explain why. And then, they conclude by saying the department's concerns encompass, the well-being of the offenders in their custody, but also the public safety and the circumstances affecting their own staff. And they say, we are committed to returning our staff and offenders to the Western facilities as soon as practical, and they are beginning the process of relocating offenders back to the West as public utilities are in the process of being restored.
That was going to be my last question for you. Did we get any update on timeline as to when some of these, I believe it's 5 facilities in total, that were having some issues? We heard earlier last week, Katie, that Asheville has got their water system and supply restored. Do we have any update on when those facilities will be back to, I guess, standard operating procedure?
I mean, nothing super specific, Nick. They just say, we continue to strive to support our staff and the affected communities in their hometowns. And we are committed to returning these offenders to the facilities as soon as they are, practically able to begin that process of relocating them back to those Western facilities.
You can read more on this story, plus that entire letter from Adult Corrections, over on our website, carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:44, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get another look at traffic this morning with the great Boomer Von Cannon.
Oh, thank you, Nick. I'm not quite...
It's 5:49. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Monday morning to you. We are tracking a situation which has gone bad to worse in the span of just 1 week, and it encompasses the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, NCORR. We spent a lot of time on them last week. It started off 1 week ago on Monday when NCORR was in front of the North Carolina General Assembly. That was during a committee meeting when the now vacant NCORR director, Laura Hogshead, said that the worst case scenario would be that they would be about $264 million in the red. Well, a new report out from the General Assembly claims that that office is $319 million short on their budget, and that number is now 80% higher than was first disclosed. So a little backstory on that. The Disaster Relief Agency's budget deficit was widely reported at $175 million until 1 week ago. That's when officials bumped the number to $221 million, noting that it could be as high as $264. However, on Friday, the House Oversight and Reform Committee released an analysis stating that NCORR's deficit is now $100 million more, or almost more, than what Governor Roy Cooper's staff acknowledged. A financial breakdown puts NCORR at $319 million in the red, emphasizing their very muddy financial situation of the agency started by Governor Roy Cooper, Democrat Governor Cooper, after Hurricane Matthews and Florence. According to the group that put this together, the analysis at the GA, it says, leadership of the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency gave incomplete responses to pointed questions from members of the Joint Legislative Commission on Government Operations Subcommittee on Hurricane Response and Recovery during the November the 18th hearing. The claims made to legislators are refuted by lawmakers with clear breakdowns of the numbers. The report notes that NCORR leaders did not include any contingency for higher construction costs for any of the estimated 1,400 homes that still need to be complete. This is, of course, years in the making, as NCORR has miserably failed to get a lot of this work done in a timely fashion. And some of these questions about the budget were brought forward at that hearing last week. One of those claims made by Representative Sarah Stevens. Take a listen.
And currently, you're 56% of our budget. Does that sound right?
No, our entire budget for the 3 grants that we have is $981 million. That is for all of the things that we do.
And how much of that have you spent?
We have obligated all of it except for the $44 million that we are seeking to move within our own envelope.
Okay. Then I'm going to go back to something. I think in one of these reports you said that there was $37.6 million not available to pay for things that have already been built.
They are outstanding invoices that have come in over the past few months. So we've been paying at $5 million a week.
And if you encumbered the money as soon as you let the contract, why is the money not there for this $37.6 million? Maybe I need to understand your definition of encumber.
We simply were not watching carefully enough. We were going fast and not watching carefully enough on the encumbrances. But we do have money that we can move within our own envelope. It's what we're saying to you all is that we can move money, but we'd have to break commitments. And at this point, we have not wanted to break commitments like the 5 commitments that we have to affordable housing in Eastern North Carolina. We can move more money if we are starting to break commitments to other projects.
That was from the hearing that took place 1 week ago, and all of this is because the North Carolina General Assembly, well, first of all, is frustrated with NCORR and their lack of ability, but they are also trying to figure out which group, which organization is going to be responsible for the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that it is going to take to clean up portions of western North Carolina. This is going to be a story we follow over the next couple of months, and definitely big time as we head into the next General Assembly session coming up in early January. We'll continue to track the details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Breaking this morning at the Charlotte Douglas International Airport, workers voted to go on strike over what they're calling unfair labor practices and poverty wages. Service workers, including cabin cleaners, wheelchair attendants, laboratory workers, trash truck drivers, and ramp workers, say that they cannot afford rent or food. These workers are employed by American airline contractors ABM and Prospect. The strike came at the start of one of the busiest travel periods of the year. Roughly 1 million people are expected to travel through Charlotte Douglas for the Thanksgiving travel season. During the Memorial Day weekend, the workers held a similar strike as well. Workers said that some of them have been homeless or have slept in their cars because of low wages. Those workers may make between $12.50 and $19 an hour. That all started about an hour ago at 5 o'clock this morning when workers were on the picket lines, and at 11 o'clock they will move the strike to an area across from the airport where they will hold what they're calling a Strikes-Giving dinner a couple of days before the Thanksgiving holiday. That is expected to last at least through today. We'll continue to track the details throughout the day here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT, and we'll have any breaking or additional details coming up for you tomorrow morning right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. One of our other stories that we were tracking throughout the morning is this very interesting back and forth at the North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections. They have come out with a release last week saying that accusations made in a letter from several human rights groups related to the treatment and conditions of inmates that had to be relocated from Western North Carolina to other facilities throughout the state due to those facilities not having power, water, or dealing with some sort of infrastructure damage is based on information that is, quote, incorrect. Further, they said some reports are totally false and from a small number of disgruntled offenders. The statement came in a letter last week responding to the activist groups who recently called on the adult corrections to release some inmates early due to alleged overcrowding in the transfers prompted by Hurricane Helene. They also allege that there are poor living conditions at some of the correctional facilities. The activist letter read as this: "It is responsible and prudent for the administration to minimize the state prison population once again by applying these common sense principles to permit low-risk individuals to return home." However, the NCDAC responded to that and said, quote, "As you are no doubt well aware, the percentages you cite reflect standard operating capacity for these facilities, not expanded operating capacity, and certainly not maximum operating capacity," according to the letter. You can read more details on that story by visiting our website this morning, carolinajournal.com. Katie Zinder's got the details there. That's going to do it for a Monday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We are back tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Have a great Monday.
You clear, brother?